All right. Hi, everybody. It is Wednesday, January 19th, 2022. And so this is our first broadcast of 2022, which I guess makes sense because January, beginning of the year. Ooh. Anyway, like tonight we have an open theme. So we're just calling it Potpourri because it's anything goes. And this was actually, Bowen's request for a theme, or more like non-theme. So he's going to be reading first, and then after him, we are going to hear from Jeff Wood and Seth, Richard Friesen, and Steve Anderson. So yeah, this should be a good show. Also, I don't really have a whole lot to announce, but just in case you are looking for a writers conference, Pikes Peak Writers has a conference coming up and registration's currently open. That conference takes place from April 29th to May 1st, and it is being held at the Colorado Springs Doubletree. There's also an add-on happening on April 28th, and I'm not actually sure what that is, unfortunately, but I know someone who might know about this, so I will go ahead and add Bowen here. Hello.
Hello.
So
Good
you are
evening to
a
you.
what's that?
I said
Good
good evening
evening.
to you.
Yes, good evening to you too. How are things going over in your neck of the woods?
Bit icy, a little icy down here, a little slick on the roads, but it's nice to have the moisture
True, yeah.
versus around Christmas time we were scared everything was going to burn down. So
Right. So it's a good change.
yep.
Um, Now, do you have any details on the conference since you're a past president of PPW?
Um, I would just recommend people go to pikespeakwriters.com for all the details. I know it's going to be fun. It's going to be great to get back live. This is their first year at the new venue at the Doubletree. Aaron Michael Ritchie is going to be the MC, so I'm really looking forward to that because he's a hoot, and
Nice.
I think it's just going to be overall going to be a great time. The usual thing with great keynotes and workshops, but just seeing all the writers again and networking. It's my favorite part about the conference.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bowen. And what are you going to be reading for us tonight?
I'm going to be reading for you the opening three scenes of Death and Deception, which is a Rom and Druid adventure. Those are characters featured in my story Dawn Trouble that was in the Fresh Starts anthology. So I'll be
Cool.
reading about 20 minutes of these guys doing some
All
stuff.
right.
So,
Sounds cool.
all right.
All right. Leave you to it.
Thank you. Get this big here. What do you mean, not bad? Druid prodded Rom in the chest with the strung tip of his bow. Kilrain's shot went high right. The kid is off even more. Look at mine. Rom shrugged. I'm looking. Do you see? I do. Druid prodded again. Dead center. 70 yards with a crosswind. Shot on command, and all I get from you is not bad? Rom shrugged again, more emphatically. I've seen better. What? When? When have you seen a better shot than that? Druid lowered his bow and swept a callous-fingered hand at the distant target. Well, Rom cleared his throat and crossed his arms. I've seen a fully armored knight charging downhill, shield raised. Catch it right here. He pointed to his neck, the spot where a knight's gorget and shoulder pauldron met. And that was closer to 100 yards. Druid cradled his bow and spread his feet. Uh-huh. Oh, and I've seen a bandit leader shot through the eye despite being 30 feet up on a castle allure, hiding behind a thrashing buxom blonde. Then there was the arrow up the dragon's snout, the ricochet around the corner that killed a goblin king, the shot that split the hangman's rope, okay. Druid lifted a hand. I get it. You've seen some good archery in your day. I think so, said Rom. May I ask who this master of bow and shaft might be? Druid cocked his head expectantly. Rom wrinkled his brow. Are you serious? Druid lifted his chin. Behind him, the other two competing archers, having heard Rom's litany of phenomenal marksmanship, turned to hear a little more. The younger of the two looked fresh off the farm and gripped his plain bow like a garden spade. The older, greasier shooter held his exotic weapon of black wood the protective way a man might grip stolen booty. Oh, piss off, Rom chucked his friend on the shoulder. A childish grin broke across Drood's face as he turned to once more look at the target. I'd forgotten about the one up the nose. Still, this shot was pretty darn good, under the circumstances. Rom shook his head at his longtime friend's incredulity. And what circumstances are those? I'm hungover. You're always hungover. No, not always, said Drood. Sometimes I'm drunk. Well, them's just stories. The greasy Kilrain pulled a fresh, white-fletched arrow from its quiver. Stories carry no weight. I say you got lucky. Shoot again. Why? Drood pointed downrange with his bow. I've won. You each owe me 2 bits. The farm boy mutely fumbled for his coin purse. Kilrain slapped the big lad on the arm. Put away your silver unless you're paying me, boy. I say we shoot again, double or nothing. Drood looked from his competitors to his friend. He said double or nothing. He did, confirmed Rom, gripping his sheathed sword and thumbing the pommel. I just laid a shaft dead center, and he wants to up the bet. Seems that way. The farm boy raised a hand for attention. Sorry, but I ain't got no 4 bits to lose. Not till Captain pays us end of the month. Oh, it's fine. Kilrain slapped the kid on the arm again. Ain't like we don't know where to find you. Kilrain's eyes narrowed as his crooked grin tightened. Besides, if you win, you'll have 8 bits jingling in that little leather pouch of yours. The kid brightened, as if the idea of winning hadn't actually occurred to him until that moment. All right, I'm in. He too snatched up a new arrow. Drood considered them, checked with Rom, who only shrugged yet again, and took an arrow for himself, his with fletchings of gray goose feather. Fine, double or nothing. Let's say closest to my last arrow wins. That'll do, snickered Kilrain. Fine by me, said the kid, rolling out his shoulders and taking up his stance. The 3 bowmen set their feet sidelong to the target. Each nocked his arrow, raised his bow in his left hand, and drew with his right. Each steadied his breath and took aim. What are they doing? A small voice whispered by Rom's elbow. The big swordman lifted a finger for quiet. It's a bet, he whispered back, and then louder to the archers. On my command. Are they all going to shoot at once? Asked the whisperer. Yes, hush, hissed Rom. Oh, I'm sorry. Any time, you lummox, grunted Kilrain from the side of his mouth. Loose, Rom shouted. 3 bowstrings twanged, 3 arrows hissed, heavy thunks of iron heads piercing straw-stuffed burlap, and the unmistakable crack of splitting wood. The archers lowered their bows. Well, I'll be, said the slack-jawed farm boy. Likewise, Kilrain uttered, no firkin' way. Drood just stood there, one eyebrow cocked, lips pursed, considering. 70 yards away, the straw dummy target rocked gently from the impact. 7 shafts protruded from it. Actually, 5 whole shafts, and one with gray feathers split down the middle, pinned by a white-fletched arrow above it and Kilrain's brown-fletched one below. A second, gray-feathered arrow quivered between the curled halves. A whistle of impressed appreciation sounded beside Rom. Your friend is some shot. That he is, said the big man with a smile. 4 bits. Drood held open his hand to Kilrain. Kilrain shook his head, leaning away. No. The damn bet was closest 2, not. Well, you can't get any closer than that, stuttered the farm boy. I'll have to owe you, sir, till payday, that is. Drood unstrung his bow. Oh, keep your coins, kid. I don't need them. The farm boy meekly bowed his head. That's mighty kind of you, Mr. Drood, sir. He trudged away, a couple of equally farm-fresh lads joining him from the dispersing crowd that had gathered to watch the show. Kilrain's shoulders sagged, and he sniffed. Yep, mighty kind. Right sporting of you. And he turned to walk away. Oh, I don't need the kids' coins, Kilrain, but yours, for some reason, I have a deep and gnawing need to liberate. Drood held open his hand. 4 bits. The greasy archer considered Drood's hand, eyes narrowed and fidgety like a cornered weasel's. He wrung his bow, then, with a grunt, dug in his coin purse and slapped the money in Drood's palm. He slunk off back to the barracks. That man does not lose well, said the small voice beside Rom. Rom clicked his tongue in agreement, acknowledging his neighbor for the first time. He was a small-boned, disheveled man, unkempt black hair speckled with white, tattered, wrinkled beige cloak over tattered, wrinkled shirt and trousers, and mud-spattered shoes in need of a cobbler. He gripped the stub of an unlit cheroot in his right hand. A thin wedding band adorned his left. Despite looking like he'd either just rolled from bed fully clothed or just stepped away from a dust-up at a local pub, the man held a keen intelligence, evident to Rom by dark, sharp eyes. The left one was lazy. Perhaps because of it, Rom got the distinct impression that this fellow saw what others missed. "You're quite the marksman there," said the little man as Drood returned from retrieving the spent arrows. Drood gave a modest shrug. "The boys downtown told me that if I wanted to talk to the best archer there is, I needed to come see you." "Downtown?" asked Rom. "At the constabulary." The little man touched his forehead. "Where are my manners? I'm sorry." He tucked the unlit cheroot in the corner of his mouth and extended his hand to grip Rom's. "Inspector Palumbo, nice to meet you." Rom stood querulous as the inspector shook his hand. Drood stood at attention, tucking the handful of arrows behind his back like a little boy hiding stolen sweets. "Did you say constabulary?" asked Drood, dry-mouthed. "I did," said the inspector, offering a hand to Drood, but seeing them full of the tools of his trade, retracted it. He pulled the cheroot from his mouth, leaving a playful grin in its place. "You're a constable?" asked Rom. Palumbo gave a little wave. "Of sorts. Don't I look it?" "Frankly, no," said Rom, thumbing the pommel of his sword. "Begging your pardon," said Drood, "but most constables we've dealt with come with steel caps, wooden clubs, and iron manacles. Not—" He tipped his head in emphasis. "Oh, we have those too. Me, I work to make sure we send the boys with the clubs after the right wrongdoer, if you get my meaning." Palumbo leant forward. "You'll find here we do things a bit different than most places. Our prince likes an orderly city." He raised one finger. "However, he also likes justice, as do I. It's important we catch criminals that prey on our citizens, catch the actual criminals, not just publicly punish some undesirables to calm down the populace. That's where I come in." Drood, who'd had a nervous feeling about this man from the start, now felt a bead of sweat drip down his back. So are you here because you think we are criminals?" The inspector paused, looking hard from Drood to Rom. The big swordsman knit his brows. He didn't like where this conversation was going. Drood waited, thoughts of past actions some might deem questionable racing through his head, though for the life of him he couldn't think of anything untoward done in this town to warrant local law enforcement. Well, there was the altercation over the twin barmaids, but that had been settled by an apology and 10 silver coins. Palumbo lowered his hand with another dismissive wave. "No, nothing like that. I just have some questions, that's all. Questions for experts in their field. Like I said, when I asked about the best men with sword and bow, the boys downtown gave your names right off. Rom and Drood, they said. Famous heroes, they said. No better archer," he gestured with his cheroot at Drood than at Rom, "and no better swordsman." Rom thumbed his pommel again. They'd been in town for 1 month, signed on with Blaine's bastards 2 weeks ago, and still their reputation preceded them, like a rolling tide that couldn't be stopped. While it afforded them leverage for the best wages and choice postings within mercenary bands like the bastards, it always brought with it unwanted attention, like now. Drood, more at ease but still wary, crossed his arms in front of him, shafts clicking against his bow stave. "What kind of questions do you have, Inspector?" The little man rocked back on his heels. "The kind that involved the murder of prominent townsfolk. One shot through the heart at great distance, and one, the prince's fencing instructor, killed by a single sword thrust." The next scene. "The shooter had to be on that rooftop there," insisted the late Baron Robles' thin, trim major domo, pointing past the broken window with a tapering gloved finger. The view east from the third floor of Baron Robles' Midtown Manor House took in a wide swath of the city. The morning sun shone in the mercantile district below, stretching nearly a mile to the city's protective wall. It looked to Rom a forest of roofs, some flat, some pitched, some tiled, some thatched, a forest one could easily get lost in. The rooftop in question capped an apartment above a little sweet shop, the only two-story structure on the block. It had a steep roof of slate tiles and a single chimney poking up from its center. Courtyard, garden wall, and a broad market lane separated the shop from the Baron's house. Palumbo rubbed his forehead, stub of cheroot still wedged between his fingers. Let me review your story, if I may. The Baron was standing in front of the window. He moved to the huge opening, arms spread, and took it all in. Framed like this, he made a fine target. Now then, the arrow shattered the glass, pierced his heart, he staggered back, and he fell. The inspector mimed the scene and pointed at the spot the servant indicated the body had been found. Rom and Drood both glanced at the patterned silk rug, then around the room. This grand, high-ceilinged chamber was the Baron's library, with bound volumes neatly arranged on dark wooden shelves lining 3 walls, a massive marble fireplace on the 4th. A gold and crystal chandelier hung above the rug, laden with several dozen creamy wax candles. The major domo clasped his hands behind his back and gave a curt nod. Yes, sir. I found him on his back right there. And the arrow, said the instructor, tapping below the left side of his breast. It struck him here, between the ribs. The servant cleared his throat. Yes, sir. Drood walked to the spot where former Baron Robles was found. He bent down, rubbed the silky fibers, then stood and turned to the window. He couldn't see the city wall from this angle, let alone the roof across the street. He looked at the smooth white ceiling and clicked his tongue. He returned to the great window, its sill at knee height and the top of which even Rom would have to stretch to reach, and inspected the reading chairs set before it. They flanked a walnut side table and were set to maximize the use of natural light. That's a 50-yard shot, said Drood, his hair stirred by a stiff breeze whistling through the shattered pane. At an elevated target, and last night the wind was erratic, gusting, not steady like today. Yes, sir, it was, said Palumbo, circling his cheroot hand as if stirring his memory. The missus had me closing shutters before turning in, afraid the neighbor's linden might topple into our kitchen. How tall was the Baron? Asked Rom, still eyeing the rug. Oh, smaller than you, that's for sure, said Palumbo, looking up at the towering swordsman. But bigger than me, though most everyone is. I'd say perhaps an inch taller than Mr. Drood here. Rom and Drood exchanged doubtful looks. Whoever killed your Baron had me one incredible shot, said Drood, and I mean incredible. A kill shot from that perch in those conditions at that range? He shook his head. But could it have been done, sir? Asked Palumbo, dark eyes narrowed. Rom drew a deep breath and cocked an eyebrow at his friend. Drood chewed his lip. With one shot? Not having tested the range? It's a 1 in 1,000 chance. Palumbo pressed him. But could it be done? Of course it could, sniffed the major domo. The Baron's dead, isn't he? Someone shot him. Excuse me. Drood tipped his head side to side. Looks that way. Perhaps. If the archer was skilled enough, experienced enough, used a heavy enough bow, and his timing was perfect, yeah, someone could make that shot. Palumbo nodded. Okay, good. Now, if you gentlemen will indulge me, we have another stop to make, one where your expertise, Mr. Rom, will come in handy. The fencing instructor? Asked Drood. Palumbo said, That's right, and he turned for the door. Next scene. You say he was found this morning? Asked Brom, wrinkling his nose, despite the corpse not stinking. That would take another day. He'd smelled the reek of slaughter enough that his reactions came no matter what state the dead may lie in. The dead in this case used to be Sir Mansion von Beek, courtier, royal swordmaster, and personal fencing instructor to the Crown Prince himself. The man was a local legend, winner for a dozen years of every tournament in every kingdom, earldom, or dukedom within 100 miles. Yet here he lay, naked, on a scored and blood-stained table in a cold, windowless, torchlit room below the palace. No more than meat, being probed and prodded by His Majesty's royal physician in a quest for answers as to how so great a man was felled by what appeared to be a single wound. That's correct, said the royal physician, adjusting the lenses perched atop his beak of a nose. My assistant found him on her return from the alchemist's. Your assistant crosses the dueling yard on her errands? Asked Rom. The physician sniffed. No, she crosses the southwest corner of the courtyard. That was where she found the late Sir Mansion. The physician tipped his head, indicating a small, mousy woman in gray robes, with straw-colored curls tied back in thick, wire-rimmed glass lenses that gave her the startled look of a spooked owl. He was in the shadows, so I didn't see him on my way out, she said, voice a soft squeak. Yes, girl, very good. Back to your tasks. The physician snapped his fingers. Just a moment, said Rom to the assistant. Did he look like this when you found him? The color and these? Rom pointed at the maggots squirming on the body's eyes and mouth. She looked from Rom to the corpse to her master, hands white-knuckled, gripping her cloak. Answer him, girl, barked the physician. Aye, she said. He was already blue, and the flies had been at him. The physician dismissed her with a wave. Yes, yes, he was likely killed late last evening. His body lay open to the elements until she stumbled upon it. Rom furrowed his eyes at Drood, who nodded in response. The bowman leant forward over the body, checking the fatal wound. As you can see, said the physician, moving uncomfortably close to Drood and pointing at the wound with a thin copper rod, a single deep thrust to the heart so precise as to kill instantly. Inspector Palumbo nodded, rubbing his scalp. That would kill a man. It would, said Drood, stepping away to stand by Rom. That it would. Strange, said the swordsman, that there are no other wounds, not a scratch. This man was found sword in hand, as if killed while doing what he does best, and yet he bears no mark of an actual duel. Save for a wound 3 fingers wide, piercing his chest through the heart, interjected the physician, with narrowed eyes. Perhaps the great Sir Mansion finally met his match. Rom ignored the physician's condescending tone. To beat this man so cleanly, so precisely, takes such mastery of the blade as to be legendary, inserted Palumbo, cocking an eyebrow at the big swordsman. Rom gave the inspector a wary glance. To the physician, Palumbo said, So, it's your belief that Sir Mansion was killed in a secret duel by a single blow. The physician crossed his arms and sniffed again. Precisely. And that is what you will report to His Majesty the Prince? The physician nodded. Amazing how Sir Mansion was killed by a blow to the exact same place your Baron Robles was struck, said Drood, inclining his head at the inspector. Palumbo gave a little grin. You have a sharp eye, sir. He gave a short bow to the physician. My thanks. We'll leave you to your work. Gentlemen, if you'll come with me, please. He pointed his unlit stub of cheroot at the door and walked past them out of the chamber. And that is where I will end.
All right. Fabulous, Bowen. Thank you so much. And is that story in the anthology, or is that no,
it's the same character. It's the same main characters, different story.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry. It's just before, like, my boyfriend was in here trying to, distract me, and
that's no problem. If anyone wants to get some more ramen, Drood, pick up Fresh Starts. It's available at fine booksellers everywhere.
Nice. All right. Thank you, Bowen. So next up, we have Jeff. Oh my God. I just totally had a brain fart. Okay. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you, Amy?
Pretty good. Yeah, I know you've been a little under the weather, but you're still here with us.
I'm happy to read, just sick and easily irritated. Other than that, I'm fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what are you reading for us tonight?
I am not going to read horror for a change. I'm reading I was going to read a new horror story, but I felt sick. I didn't want to read it. I'm reading an older flash piece that got published in a poetry journal, actually, about years ago.
Okay. Sounds good. I will leave you to it. I'll just get myself.
Hi, everybody. As you probably just heard, this was originally in a poetry journal called Halfway Down the Stairs in 2011. This also made their best of edition that year. So it's in Halfway Down the Stairs, best of 2000. At any rate, my name is Jeff Wood, and this is called Ketchup. And it's a flash. Quite Ketchup. He is in a McDonald's with the twins and their brother. And as best he can remember, Sadie wants a Happy Meal with chicken nuggets. Madison wants 2 cheeseburgers and apple slices instead of fries. He's unable to learn what Jaden wants, as Jaden is happily engaged at the condiments counter, filling an endless series of small plastic cups with ketchup from the dispenser. He's sure Jaden has ketchup on his hands, his clothes, the counter, the floor. He's too tired to look, too fearful at the unholy red mess he is certain to find. Long minutes later, when the food is finally delivered, the kids all bolt to the white plastic table, tiny hands bursting with napkins and straws and ketchup cups and little paper salt packets. He tags wearily along behind them, greasy bags of food in hand, as if herding sheep. He rarely lets them eat at McDonald's, but they've eaten there 7 or 8 times this last month after the visits to the hospital, the homes of various relatives, the funeral parlor, and not just McDonald's, but Taco Bell, KFC, Wendy's. Bright colors, bright lights, primary colors, everything paper or plastic, everything disposable. They can just eat it and leave, nothing to clean up, nothing to think about. Well meaning friends, relatives, seeming strangers press food into his hands almost daily, but he can't bring himself to cook it, can't bring himself to even turn on the oven. The casserole dishes sit stacked in the freezer like sides of beef. When he got the call in the middle of the night, he packed the barely awake kids into the back seat and drove to his mother's house, expecting to be greeted by ambulances and the flashing lights of fire trucks. But of course, they had all left by the time he'd completed the 3 hour drive. Pools of fog lay in the pre-dawn fields and shallow valleys between his house and hers. Months later now, and he still thinks of grief in this same way, lying low to the ground, indistinct, inert. He remembers how during the drive he wanted to gently pull the car over to the side of the road so as not to wake the kids, get out and lie down in it, cool grass against his back, damp air against the skin of his face. How he wanted to be blanketed in fog, embraced by it. The rest of the world disappeared into the wide, hazy distance forever. Madison has dropped her hamburger onto the floor and is crying, inconsolable. He offers her his own untouched burger, then plies the used patty off the floor, thick, globby filaments of ketchup stretching out between the meat and linoleum before falling prey to gravity, joining the dirty napkins, the crushed French fries, the congealed pools of soda. An unholy red mess. Tubes running into her arms, her chest, her mouth, pure white squares of antiseptic gauze stained with prim dots of blood. He has not wept yet. The house is a pigsty. Clothes, dishes, newspaper, mail. There is so much cleaning up to do. More than anything else, he wants to mourn the way people mourn on television, staring into a serene sunset, walking on a beach as waves crash and gulls coo. But Jaden is putting french fries up his nose, desperate for approving laughter. Sadie needs to go to the bathroom right now. And Madison is giving him a look of such love and pure devotion for giving her his burger that it would break his heart had he time to ponder it. Time, yes, time, break his heart and beside him with love if only he had time to ponder it. He needs time and silence and solitude, but the dizzy pace of the day does not allow it. Things are not where they belong and will not fall into place. Nothing stands still. This untidy business of life just goes on and on and on. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. And I hope you feel better soon.
I'm sure I will. I'll be listening in the background.
Okay. Sounds good. All right.
Thank you for inviting me. This is a really, really good thing you do here.
Oh, thank you. All right. So next up we have Seth. So how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, just, surviving. So let's see. What are you reading for us tonight?
Well, I'm going to read a section of my absurdist satirical novel, The Perfect Stranger.
Nice.
It's got a couple of fun characters that I thought I would share with people tonight.
All right. Sounds awesome. I will leave you to it.
All right, welcome everyone. As you just heard, this is going to be a section of my satirical novel, The Perfect Stranger. A couple of things I need to let you know. One of the main characters is named Neiman, and he is the town's head librarian. He's an intellectual who is very fond of using big words and talking about philosophical subjects. And earlier in the novel, he had been smitten by an assistant librarian, and he finally got up the courage to invite her to dinner at his place and also to meet his aunt. A couple of things you should know in this town: the middle class is known as would-be's, and the upper class is known as brittle bombs. In this town, young girls who have any brittle bomb blood in them are put up for auction when they come of age. The main deity in this town, this culture, is called Pup, P-U-P in capital letters. So heaven is called Puppyland. And brandy is called Crandy. And beer is called Stew Juice. So this is The Perfect Stranger. Auntie Macaza, as Neiman called his mother's half-sister, stomped around their small two-bedroom condo, her bottom lip protruding in its permanent pout. Glazed braised rabbit bubbled on the stove, a peach cherry cobbler baking in the oven, its thick, sticky aroma tiptoeing into every nook and cranny of their modest apartment. Under her breath, the silver-haired matron shouted silent barbs, stuffed with curses, as she listened to the hissing of the shower and the off-key singing of her ingrate of a nephew. The nerve of him, she thought. After all, hadn't she given him everything? She stormed about the kitchen, grabbing a knife and imagining the net of a red-headed hussy as she sliced and diced the defenseless shallots and garlic cloves. The task executed with military precision, she then looked about as if for a place to bury the body. She settled for folding the garlic and company into her secret sauce. Neiman, she reminded herself, said he wanted his absolute favorites tonight, practically insisted on it. Here she had given him the best years of her life, the second half of it anyway, and now here he was planning to replace her and using her own culinary skills to do so. She brushed her hair back, catching a glimpse of her plump, admittedly overripe figure in the mirror. Gone were her glory days. Then, too, gone were those years of abject humiliation, the errors of her youth, all but forgotten. True, Neiman had been a dear to offer his spare bedroom, but then again, she had repaid him with years of loyalty, not to mention the culinary masterpieces she prepared for him night after night. She even put up with his irrepressible naivete, totaled his ultra-liberal conceits, smiling through headaches as she listened to his highfalutin verbal gibberish. Still, his oversized cerebral cortex, for all its syntactic gymnastics and seditious assaults on common practical sense, was too refined for the likes of some library assistant, some sorry excuse for a mere would-be. No doubt this woman, this Kate, was nothing but a hussy bent on stripping away any hope Neiman had of bettering himself. The fool, she snapped, hearing the off-pitch crooning over the running water and hiss of steam. The stupid fool. Didn't he know how ridiculous he looked, grinning from ear to stupid ear like that, staring into empty space? He had been like that for weeks, so much so that she had even come to miss the way he would diplomatically ignore her, hanging out instead with his book buddies or secretly flirting with those glossy periodicals he filed under his mattress. These days, he preferred staring at the woodwork or smiling stupidly at candlelight flicker. The other day, he had spent half an hour fiddling with her antique music box, listening over and over to the chime's endless refrain of "Love is a many resplendent ding-a-ling." and he completely brushed aside her comments on which vegetables sauteed best at which temperatures, and which oven cleaner leaves the least residue and can double as toenail polish remover in a pinch. Ignoring her was one thing, but ignoring Pythagoras? That dog doted on the ingrate, lived for Neiman to come home, fill her bowl, add food coloring to her milk, scratch behind her ears, and fluff her pillow when she was ready to retire. As if on cue, a four-legged bratwurst sauntered into the kitchen, its droopy ears scraping the floor as it made its way to an empty bowl. Looking about, seeing no one dashing to replenish said bowl, the bratwurst emitted a muted woe is me, pity the helpless whine. Wait your turn, the old woman snapped, her hands presently covered with a speckled pasty substance. Methodically, she stuffed the pasty mash into several multicolored lobster shells. Pythagoras looked on sad-eyed as the matron rinsed and wiped her hands with a kitchen cloth. Seemingly oblivious to the dog's permanent whine, the woman proceeded to brush the shells lightly with sesame oil, after which she carried the pan of stuffed lobster to the oven, sliding it next to the peach cherry cobbler. Another woeful whine was met with the matron's brusque kick, not hard, but abrupt enough to make its point. The old woman ordered the bratwurst to move. Demoralized, Pythagoras turned, sulking away, only to be called back by the repentant matron. Auntie Macasa stooped, scooping up the bratwurst, rubbing its head and kissing behind both ears. She explained through pursed lips how Mummy's just upset because another bitch is planning to destroy the life the three of us have built together. To show the bratwurst there was no hard feelings, she reached in the oven and pulled out one of the stuffed lobsters. Removing the shell, she scraped the remains into the dog's bowl. Both woman and bratwurst perked their ears at the sound of the shower stopping. Neiman's singing rang out all the more clearly, accompanied soon by a rap-tap-tapping on his dresser, followed by the clattering of clothes hangers. As he always left his door cracked, his aunt could even distinguish the 1-2-1-2 slapping of aftershave being briskly applied. The spindly-legged matron shook her head. Neiman's sudden fondness for aftershave said it all. She sighed, acknowledging she had long feared this moment. She told herself to be grateful it hadn't happened sooner. But still, she argued, why did it have to happen now, less than a week before the Smollett girl goes up for auction? You'd think Pup was deliberately out to thwart her. I'll get it, Neiman called, his aunt only then aware the doorbell had rung. She glanced at Neiman poking his ridiculously smiling face into the kitchen. His clean-shaved, cologned, wiry figure was a slap to her face. How could he be so insensitive? Her nephew dashed away, this time singing on pitch as he approached the front door. His aunt turned, determined to concentrate on her next task, heating her special crandy cream sauce. She hummed, or tried to, her insincere harmonizing swiftly drowned out by the lilting musicality of two high-pitched voices enraptured to see each other. Her stomach wrenched at the warble of a feminine voice telling her Neiman how handsome he looked. His response, remarking how every time he thought she could not get more beautiful, she continued to prove him wrong, did not help his aunt's disposition. When the profusion of complimentary horseradish was followed by a lingering silence, the old woman imagined two sets of lips puckered and pressed against each other. She wondered if Neiman had read up on what to do with his tongue. Nearly tripping over Pythagoras, she clutched the edges of the sink to compose herself. When her equilibrium returned, the matron plucked a wooden spoon from a basket and stirred the sauce bubbling on the stove. She sighed, watching the sauce thicken, recalling how this very sauce once stole a young man's heart. a young man who in turn stole a younger girl's honor. She stirred with increasing vigor, wincing each time she heard that high-pitched squeak call something absolutely adorable. Their small, modest apartment, absolutely adorable. Her golden lane 18th century music box, absolutely adorable. The family heirlooms cluttering the end table, absolutely adorable. The simulated fire in the cardboard fireplace, absolutely adorable. The Neiman Hall of Fame, a hidden cranny off the living room crammed with Neiman's childhood etchings, old report cards, his surrealistic finger paintings, and abstract nudes, Neiman never having seen an actual nude. All absolutely adorable. As the two voices drew closer, the embittered matron stirred more vigorously. "And this is my antimacassar," Neiman announced proudly. He stepped across the kitchen threshold, moving to one side to ally the lithe whittle of a woman through. Wrapped snugly in a shimmering black dress, Ms. Pritt towered over Neiman's tiny aunt, the old woman reminding herself, the taller they come, the farther they fall. "Auntie is the greatest gourmet chef this side of Puppyland," Neiman boasted. "Hush, Pythagoras. That's Pythagoras, our Polish bratwurst." The dog, ears scraping the floor, emitted a low, hostile growl, baring its molars. The old woman looked on with an approving smile. Auntie, this is Kate Pritt, the Kate I've been telling you about." "Howdy do," his aunt returned, turning her back as she pretended to adjust the stove burner. "Everything smells absolutely delightful," Miss Pritt chimed. "Appetizers will be ready in a minute," the old woman offered matter-of-factly. "Help yourself to a glass of Dillabomb crandy. You'll have to forgive Pythagoras," she added as the dog continued to snarl. "You know how bratwursts are, never afraid to speak their minds. They say dogs are actually good judges of character." She glanced over her shoulder, eyeing her house guest. Miss Pritt, however, was oogling Neiman as he poured crandy into two fluted glasses. He offered to pour one for his auntie, but the old woman waved him off, pointing to a stein brimming with homemade stew juice. Having forgotten she had poured it, she swiftly made up for lost time. "Sit," she ordered, wiping her lips with the back of her hand. "Pritt, Pritt," the old woman repeated, her brows rubbing together as she savored the name. She puckered her lips as she brushed away several cobwebs clogging her memory. "Are you by any chance, oh, what was her name? Dorothy, Dowdy, Doherty Pritt?" Miss Pritt's eyes widened as she flashed a pleased smile. "You knew my mother? Then Donald Dicker must be, he's my great uncle." "Really?" the matron added, smacking her lips before downing another gulp of stew juice. She spun around towards the oven, nearly kicking the growling Pythagoras in the snout. Grabbing two oven mitts, she opened the oven door, pulling out a bubbling pan of stuffed lobster, oozing a cornucopia of aromas which quickly filled every corner of the kitchen. Finding a ladle, she doused the lobster with crandy cream, garnishing the concoction with basil and chives. "Eat," she bade her nephew and guest. "The rabbit won't be ready for another 20 minutes." "I remember Donald Dicker when he was in his prime," she continued. As Miss Pritt proclaimed the stuffed lobster absolutely delicious, the pint-sized master chef replenished her stein. "Such a fine, upstanding young man in those days, handsome as a devil. A real catch. I knew from the start what that Rosetta what's-her-name, the one who married that Radcliffe fella. I knew what she was after, what all her kind are after. I don't fault Donald one bit refusing to marry her after Auntie has rubbed elbows with most of the upper crust would-be's," Neiman cut in. Who are we, the matriarch continued, raising her stein as if about to drink? Who are we to demand the privilege behave with the mere common decency and moral integrity the lower are compelled by law to adhere to? The matron chugged from her stein, even Pythagoras pausing in her growl to admire the tiny woman's imbibing capacity. Auntie was the head of her class at Waitress Tech, Neiman informed Ms. Print. Won a scholarship to spend a summer at the Brittle Shake and Bake camp. Didn't you almost marry the head chef, Auntie? He asked. Anyway, she got him to divulge many of her choicest recipes, some he never shared with any of his other students. Auntie must have charmed his pants off, he teased. Not at the supper table, his aunt chastised, clunking her stein down. Kate, Pythagoras is addressing you. The assistant librarian turned to see the bratwurst hoisted on its haunches, its front paws raised, the slobbering pink tongue dangling from its mouth. Ms. Pritt looked to Neiman, then to the aunt, her confused expression begging for a translation. He wants you to share some of your lobster, Neiman's aunt informed her. Here, give him some of mine, Neiman suggested. No, he wants some of Kate's, his aunt insisted. Kate's our guest, and this is her opportunity to get on Pythagoras's good side. Go ahead, Kate. Show her she's just like one of the family. Gingerly, Miss Pritt plucked some lobster out of its shell. Encouraged by the matron to drench the morsel in crandy cream, the assistant librarian did so, offering the dripping sample to the dog. Pythagoras advanced, boldly licking the contents off the fork, then barking for more. Needing no translator, Miss Pritt forked over another morsel. Soon she and Pythagoras were the best of friends, so long as she kept the lobster coming. Meanwhile, Neiman's aunt had risen, busying herself at the stove. Turning off the pot of sizzling braised rabbit, she tested the peeled asparagus before spooning it into a serving bowl. A thick dish of banana au gratin was pulled from a second oven, followed by a steaming hot pan of peach cherry cobbler. Everything on the table being blessed as absolutely delightful, seconded by Neiman's rapturous whiffs of approval, the matron sat down, immediately rising again to refill her stein. As Neiman chewed, he shared his vast warehouse of knowledge on modern culinary practices, sidetracking down the evolution of the human taste bud into the invention of the tater tot by the ancient Aztecs. Both aunt and visitor smiled and nodded, the latter sincerely fascinated with the little-known and even less cared-about facts her Neiman showered on her. From the corner of her eye, the aunt noticed Pythagoras managing to scarf up the bulk of Miss Pritt's dinner, mildly offended when the dog declined any of the peeled asparagus. And that's it.
Awesome. So no veggies for the puppy. All right. Okay, Seth. Well, thank you so much.
Well,
now
thank you.
Hungry.
I was glad to share. And my website is wagingart.com. You can find more about the novel there.
Okay, wagingart.com.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right. So let's see. We've got Richard up next. Let me just make sure. Yes. Okay. Just didn't want to inadvertently reorder the universe here. All right. So, hey, Richard, how are you doing?
Good. Probably helps to have the microphone in place, though.
Okay. Well, so what are you reading for us tonight?
Well, this is a story I wrote long, long ago. It's actually about my grandma and granddad. And it's also kind of a Cinderella story, but it actually happened. So there's some interesting stuff in there.
All right.
It's not horror or anything. It's just, I guess, historical fiction.
All right.
Sort of fiction. Awesome. Fictionalized. Anyway.
History, something. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Here you go. I will leave you to it.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Richard Friesen, and normally I write science fiction and fantasy, but this one was something I wrote, like I said, a long, long time ago. And as I was thinking about this, I realized that of my grandparents' 6 kids, only one of them is left. And when he goes, there'll be a lot of stories that aren't there anymore. And back in the 60s, see, I'm old. Back in the 60s, I used to sit on the floor of my grandparents' kitchen, and my granddad would sit in his recliner and tell stories to us cousins, to me and my cousins. We no idea why the recliner was in the kitchen, but we would all listen to stories about sleigh rides in Russia where the wolves are chasing us, and a boy bragging about never being scared, being dared to go into the graveyard at night. And part of that is where I learned the love of story. And the other part is the music that was always around, and the ballads and the story songs. I still love to this day songs that are stories. But this one is, well, based on stories I heard from my aunts and uncles and my granddad. So it's called Honeymoon. 1970. Having been married for 50 years, it seems good that I should write an account of the early years of my life together with Minnie. Our wedding was different from how such things are done today. Perhaps you'll find the story interesting. 1919. I was 27 years old and had $1,000 in the bank. I felt the Lord was leading me to settle down. It was around this time that a friend of ours, Jacob Wiebe, mentioned that his sister down in Kansas was married to a man who had a very nice daughter named Wilhelmina. He said she was 17 and unspoken for. I prayed about her for some time before I finally got out the address Jacob had given me and wrote her a letter. Dear Minnie, I said, my name is Henry and I live in Jansen, Nebraska. I got your name from your uncle Jacob Wiebe. And some more followed that. She wrote back and we corresponded for some time. Minnie and I both prayed whether the Lord would have us marry, and even both chose the same verse separately to claim as a promise from God. Then one time she didn't write back. I wrote to ask her why, but she didn't answer that letter either. As I found out later, both of us were unhappy during that period. When I finally did get a letter from her, she said that she hadn't been allowed to write. She said her stepmother had even taken letters out of the mailbox. So she'd finally snuck out and waited for the mailman. We decided shortly after that we couldn't make any plans to be married until we could see each other. As soon as I could, I took the train to Garden City, Kansas. I didn't really want to leave Nebraska. 1903. It was a warm July day. The sun shone down on the little farm near the Saskatoon River in northern Saskatchewan. Anna Unruh, being with child, was cooking dinner and watching her 5 children. Lizzie, who was 13 and the oldest, helped her mother. Anna's husband, Isaac Schmidt, was out tending the fields. 2-year-old Minnie sat on the kitchen's bare wood floor, playing with the blocks that Isaac had made for her. Anna smiled at her and then told 6-year-old Joel to keep quiet. The flour tin was empty, so she went to get more. Brushing back a loose strand of hair left a white spot on her temple. Without looking or even thinking, she walked into the storeroom. For one moment, Anna teetered on the edge and then fell. The cellar door had been left open. She didn't even scream. Lizzie ran to see what had happened. Her mother lay on the cellar floor, not moving. Confused and frightened, the girl ran to find her father. Later, after she woke up, Anna was all right for a few days. Then the baby started giving her problems, so they had to get the doctor again. The bearded Isaac Schmidt rubbed his hands on his coveralls. The children sat quietly, watching. It was hot in the house. The doctor came out of the bedroom wearing his dark suit and shook his head. We have lost the baby, Isaac. He put a hand on the stricken man's shoulders. Anna is not good. She is bleeding a lot. We will do what we can. Thank you, John. We will pray, Isaac said. The minutes ticked by in the long night. But in the morning, Anna died. She was buried along with her unborn child in the cemetery by the church across the road from the farm. Her grandmother, who had survived the Turkestan trek, was buried next to her, and later her parents were buried there too. 1920. I arrived in Garden City on a windy day. A man named T.H. Wiebe picked me up at the train station and drove me out to the Mennonite settlement 21 miles northeast of town. All I could see from horizon to horizon was short brown grass. The only trees at all were near where people lived. I came on a Tuesday and looked for work and a place to stay, which took the rest of the week. I didn't see Minnie until Sunday. We met at church and shook hands. She was young and pretty and very shy. In the weeks that followed, I worked as a carpenter and saw Minnie whenever I could, which was usually Sunday afternoon and Wednesday night at church. I would go over to her house unasked because she didn't dare invite me. I sat with her in the parlor. We were rarely alone there for more than a few minutes. Her stepmother did not want us to get married. She would come in and have Minnie go do some chore or other so that she wouldn't be with me. I would just sit there until she came back. I found, as we got to know each other, that she was terrified of her stepmother, Justina Wiebe. The woman wanted Minnie to stay at home until she was 30 to take care of Justina and Isaac. Justina's own daughter, however, was expected to marry young. I told Minnie we would find a way for her to leave. She would have done most anything to escape. Her stepmother would have done most anything to keep her. Soon after that, we decided we should be married. 1903. A few months after Anna died, Isaac hitched up the buggy and drove over to see his neighbor, Jake Gliga. Jake, Isaac said, once they were seated in the living room, I don't know what to do. I have 5 children at home and no wife. I cannot care for them. I need a wife. Would you perhaps give me your daughter Emma to marry? She is of a suitable age and unspoken for. Jake was somewhat surprised at this. Well, Isaac, he said, she is unspoken for, but I will have to ask her. If she agrees, I will give you my consent. Unknown to either of them, the girl had been sitting on the steps listening to their conversation. At that point, she ran quietly up the stairs and into her room so her father wouldn't know she'd heard them. Her father entered soon after. Isaac Schmidt has asked for your hand in marriage. No, father, she said. He has asked you for my hand in marriage. I don't think I want to marry him. He's a good man, Emma. I know, but I don't want to marry him. If he wanted to marry me, he should have asked me. The girl watched Isaac from upstairs window as he walked away. 1920. To keep the peace, I asked Isaac's permission to marry his daughter. At first, he didn't like the idea, but finally he said it would be all right if we agreed to stay in Garden City and take care of him and his wife in their old age. Neither Minnie nor I wanted a marriage with strings attached, so we decided to wait a while. Finally, we told Isaac and Justina that we wanted to be married and that we would think about staying in Garden City. It was a hard choice for us to make. We decided to hold the wedding in Harmony School, the settlement's one-room schoolhouse, because the church was just a basement. They'd built the church hoping to finish the upper floors later, but they had never had enough money. Our first problem came up when Minnie had finished making her dress, which was white. It turned out that she only had one pair of shoes, which were old and brown. She asked Justina for a new pair of shoes, and her stepmother told her that the ones she had were good enough. Minnie was horrified at the thought of appearing at her own wedding in old brown shoes. By then, I knew more than to say anything to Justina. I needed to go to town anyway to get our marriage license, so I went down and bought her a nice pair of shoes too. Henry, you shouldn't have, Minnie said, but she was smiling. 1907. Isaac left the children at home for 5 days without telling them where he was going. When he returned, he introduced Justina, saying, "This is your new mother." It did not go over well. Later, Isaac and his new wife, Justina Weeby, decided that it was finally time to build a barn on their little Canadian farm. After digging out a hole for the barn's foundation, they, along with their neighbors, set up the forms and poured the concrete. Justina decided that the concrete was too expensive and that they were using far too much of it. So she went around putting large rocks into the forms. Isaac knew this would weaken the concrete, but he didn't want to make waves. So, waiting until his wife couldn't see him, he followed her around and took the rocks back out. 1920. A few days before we got married, Isaac and Justina took me to a public sale down the road. Minnie had to stay home to get ready for the wedding. I kept quiet on the way over to avoid trouble. When we got there, Isaac started buying all kinds of harnesses and equipment that he thought we would need to farm with. Thinking it was some kind of wedding present, I didn't object. But when it came time to pay for the things, they expected me to do it. They knew how much money I had. By then, there wasn't much I could do, so I paid for the equipment. 1917. Young Minnie had been horrified when she found out that the family was moving to Kansas. Her 2 older sisters, already married, were staying in Waldheim, as were her 2 brothers. The trip down from Canada was a long one for her. She was lonely. One day, not many weeks after they'd arrived, Minnie came to the dinner table with a large, ugly bruise on her arm. "Where did you get that?" her father asked. "Mama pinched me again," Minnie said. "Again? Again?" For once, Isaac was outraged. "Justina, you will never touch my daughter again." And such was his anger that Justina never physically abused Minnie again. 1920. My brother John Friesen was the only person from Jansen who came down for the wedding. Minnie and I were married May 20, 1920. We got almost no presents whatsoever. Some bedding and about $12 was all. We spent the first couple of days after the wedding at Isaac and Justina's house. They offered to buy us the quarter section of land across the road from them for us to live on. Neither Minnie nor I wanted to be that close to them. We told them we would stay in Garden City if we could rent the place 2 miles down the road. It had a well, a windmill, a cattle barn, and a small chicken house. Her parents finally agreed. On May 24th, we got up early in the morning and hitched our best team to the double-boxed lumber wagon we borrowed for the day. Then together we rode to town, high up off the ground on that wagon. The 5-hour trip was the longest time we'd had alone together since we'd met. It was the only honeymoon we ever had. "Thank you, Henry," she said. "You're welcome, Minnie." She was worried about how we would live, so I told her about the $1,000 I'd saved. She was very relieved. But she had been willing to marry me without ever knowing whether we had money at all or how we would live. We decided that we would spend $300 that day on things we needed. We bought some food and used furniture. We also bought some clothes for Minnie. She didn't have but 1 or 2 dresses. The next day, we went over and scrubbed the shiplap floor of the chicken barn. Then we washed the walls and windows. After we finished, we moved in what furniture we had. That night, we lay in bed and talked, looking up at the stars through the cracks in the ceiling. We talked late into the night, telling each other all about our lives up until that day. We lived in that chicken barn for 5 years until I finished building our house. And now, having been with Minnie for 50 years, I have never regretted marrying her once. The end.
All right. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
That was awesome. So let's see. I'm going to just bring up Steve here. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I am doing pretty well. How are you doing?
Doing okay.
Awesome. So what are you reading for us tonight?
Tonight we'll be doing another story in the If These Walls Could Talk series.
All right.
Tonight's
Awesome.
story is of Johnny and Emily's first date. So we're early in their relationship, and with that, I don't think that there will be any confusion, even though this is into the series, but it's fairly self-explanatory what happens.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll leave you to it.
Okay. I breathed in the smell of Emily on a cold spring night, lost in the joy of having her gloved fingers wrapped around mine. Her hat and scarf glistened in the neon from our misty walk across campus from the University Theater to Hubbard's Grill. Emily smelled of wet wool and something tropical. Coconut, maybe. We hadn't talked much after the play, each lost in our own thoughts while we walked. I opened the steamed over glass door for her. Hubbard's was busy, despite the late hour, with students camped out in the red vinyl booths, come for the reliable Wi-Fi and cheap plates of comfort food. We sat and ordered. Our waitress gave me a little smile. Be right up, Professor Calais. You know her? Emily asked. Miss Delamere. She's in my Intro to Paleontology class. Smart kid, very serious. Emily shook her head. College professor. I always forget. I don't see you that way. How do you see me? I was curious what Emily would say. She calls me when she needs help. Cold cases and murder, not exactly the stuff of a Hallmark romance. Tonight's date was part of our experiment to see if there was more to us than homicide detective Emily Lindell and the guy that she calls when she needs to know what walls say when they talk. Emily shrugged. I don't know. You scare me a little. What you do, it's spooky. You should be a preacher of a religion no one's heard of, or a professor of something mystical. Not rocks. That's boring. She waved her hand to brush away the insult. I mean, it's too normal. Miss Delamere came back and put our plates in front of us. She studied Emily while she was doing it, as though me being on a date was something unexpected and she wanted to see what kind of woman would find me attractive. I thanked her and turned back to Emily. The boring rock stuff is me. The other thing is a side gig. Emily lowered her voice, afraid someone might overhear. Her voice is what first attracted me to her. Warm, soft, low. It pulls me in and makes me want to lean close. I like the other things, Johnny. It fascinates me. I've never seen you teach, but I've seen you lost in memories I can't see. You're alive in those moments. When I see your face afterward, I am... Emily picked up her fork, poked at her food. I envy you, and I want more time with you. I pretended she meant to say love instead of envy and vowed to keep her wanting more. French toast with Emily at midnight made me happier than I'd been in a long time. We talked about the play we'd seen, Monster by Neil Bell, a take on Frankenstein with a more nuanced version of the creature. Emily wasn't a fan. Who was good? Who was bad? I couldn't tell. She finished her coffee and leaned across the table. That's not how it is in the real world. Monsters are evil, and I don't like stories that try to make me feel sorry for them. People get hurt when they try that in the street. I've seen it. I looked at her, not sure how to respond. You don't think there's a little bit of monster in all of us that needs forgiveness? Emily stared into her coffee cup. It's not like I'm Javert hunting bread thieves to throw in jail. Maybe that's why I work homicide. Killing someone usually means you're a monster, or on your way to becoming one. Emily had never opened this part of herself to me, and I didn't want to lose the moment. I spoke softly. Unless who you kill is a monster. Emily tucked a dark lock of her hair behind her ear. I'm not sure. Taking a life, there's a risk. You become what you kill? I don't know. I need black and white in my life, good and evil. I can't afford the gray. We were quiet for a while, eating, watching the heavy mist swirling in the lights outside the window. Miss Delamere brought our check. Can I interest you in a slice of pie or a cinnamon roll? Emily shook herself and put away the piece of her soul that she had let me glimpse. No, thank you. Refills on the coffee would be nice. Miss Delamere smiled with her eyes squinted, a look she gets when she tests rock samples to see what they might be. Decaf or something to keep you awake? They locked eyes. Full strength, Emily answered. We want to be awake until dawn. You got it. Miss Delamere filled our cups and disappeared back into the kitchen. Emily sipped, her face hidden behind the steam. I'm not sure I like her attitude. It's like she thinks we're too old to be up this late. I grinned at her. I hadn't planned on staying up all night, but I was happy to try. We finished our coffee, and I left Miss Delamere a nice tip. Emily let me help her with her coat, and I felt the buzz of the phone in her pocket before she did. You're getting a call. Her shoulders tensed under my fingers. She looked up at me, dark eyes apologetic. I have to take it. I know. I held the door for her, and we stood in the shelter of the awning while she answered. What is it, Ruiz? I leaned against the stainless steel of the facade and watched the play of light on Emily's face while she listened. It was almost 1 in the morning, and whatever Ruiz was telling her wasn't good. Okay, I'm only a couple of miles from you. And Ruiz, for God's sake, don't move stuff around before I arrive this time, all right? Emily gave me a sad look and a crooked smile. There was a flush to her cheeks, though, and an energy that hadn't come from the coffee. Someone's dead, I said, knowing it was true. She nodded, restless, as though ready to sprint through the rain back to my car. Don't apologize, I told her. I know who you are. It's close by. At the zoo, someone tied a girl to the tracks and ran one of the little locomotives over her. Oh, my stomach twisted, fearing what was to come. I parked near the northeast corner of the zoo. Emily introduced me to Officer Ruiz, and he led us through gates I'd never seen open. Nothing's been touched, he assured Emily. The night keeper found her. He heard screams, but the zoo's camera didn't show anyone breaking in. Emily paused by the carousel. Night keeper? He takes care of the animals at night, feeds them. A lot of the animals are nocturnal. He pointed down the dark, wet paths leading deeper into the zoo. Hear them? I did. Roaring, growling, strange bird calls. It sent a shiver down my spine. Ruiz smiled, a quick twisting of his lips. I've never been here at night. Not sure I like it. Emily ignored his unease. Okay, take us in. He led us to a large metal maintenance building behind the train station. One set of tracks passed beside it, and another entered through the open roll-up door. All the lights inside were on. I stopped in the doorway, unable to force my feet to carry me the rest of the way inside. Emily stayed next to me, hands on hips, taking in the carnage. A small black and silver locomotive lay on its side, the balloon stack smashed on the concrete floor. The cause of the derailment was clear. Part of the girl's body was jammed under the wedge-shaped pilot and leading wheels. More of her was under the drive wheels, and there was something tangled. I turned away. Ruiz spoke quietly to Emily. The pilot on the front of the locomotive should have just pushed her off to the side, but someone tied her to the rails. The pilot dug into her and kept going. These locomotives weigh about 3 tons, but her body was enough to derail it after about 20 yards. The coroner will be here in an hour. You want to take a look first? Emily took a deep breath and held it a moment before answering with a sharp nod. Let's start where she was tied up and work forward from there. You already have pictures? More than I want. They walked away from me. My feet still weren't interested in going inside, despite the warmth radiating from the overhead heater inside the door. Johnny, you coming? I wanted to make an excuse to wait in the car or check on the penguins or anything other than entering the maintenance building. Ruiz smirked at me, a silent challenge, and that was enough to get me moving. I'd seen death before, watched the brutal memories held by the walls play out over and over. It's never easy, but I wasn't going to show weakness to Ruiz or Emily. She knelt next to the initial point of impact to examine the blood trail now under the passenger coach. She scooted forward, head tipped, hair hanging down in front of her face. I went to study the tools hanging on the pegboard and laid out on the workbench. Ruiz joined me. Crime scene like this, hard to take, isn't it? Don't blame you for walking away. First time I saw someone ripped apart, guts everywhere, I lost my lunch. I've been to a couple of crime scenes. I didn't say it was with Emily or that I'd watched worse horrors. The less he knew about Emily and me, the better. I'll be all right. Of course you will. Look at her, though. He glanced over his shoulder. Lindell gets off on it, you know. The more blood, the better. Gets her hot. I didn't need to look. I'd seen Emily work. She loves solving mysteries, that's all. It's why she's the best. Ruiz chuckled, amused by me defending her, and I was angry at myself for taking the bait. He tipped his head toward the train. You sure? Emily held the tattered, bloody remains of a long dress up to her chin, as though checking how it would look on her. What do you think, Johnny? Ruiz answered. Not your style, Lindell. Clashes with the red in your eyes. Wasn't talking to you, Ruiz. Johnny, you seen this dress somewhere else tonight? Notice the embroidery. I stepped closer, pulled the skirt wide. This is the costume the girl wore in the play. Carlita. I let the skirt drop back and turned to Ruiz. Where's her head? Well, damn, aren't you the pair? He studied me through slit eyes as though reevaluating me. It's on the other side of the first coach, right where it fell. I didn't move nothing. We stepped around the toppled locomotive, and I took Emily's arm as soon as we were alone. I don't want to see her head. That was for Ruiz. He was being a jerk about you, and I don't want to see it. Emily blushed. He's trying to save you from me. I'm some kind of ghoul, don't you know? Really? That's not how I see you. Emily chuckled and shook her head, but didn't answer. Look, Em, if this is the girl from the play, her name is Carlita Monroe. She was my student last fall, theater major, taking first-year geology to meet her science requirement. She lit up the room every time she walked through the door. I pulled the crumpled playbill from my pocket, pressed it into Emily's hand. This has her picture. Emily lowered her voice. I remember what she looked like, Johnny. But there's only one way we're going to know what happened to her. There aren't any security cameras in here. You're going to have to watch it happen. She looked around to make sure no one could see us or hear us. And then she kissed me, a quick touch of her lips against mine. All right? I licked my lips. It made me smile despite the horror around us. All right, but it's a steel building. I squinted up at the high bay lights hanging from the open rafters. I'm sorry. Emily sighed, frustrated that her favorite tool wouldn't work. You need dry paint, drywall, and plaster to read. Must be something here for you. I shook my head. Someday I might tell her the truth, but not now, not yet. Emily pointed behind me. There, the office built into the corner. See if those walls will talk while I verify that the head belongs to, Miss Monroe, Carlita. Right. Don't let her down, Johnny. Ruiz rounded the locomotive and followed me to the office that I'd hoped Emily wouldn't notice. I had no desire to watch Carlita die. So, is it the actress? Or couldn't you bring yourself to look? Detective Lindell is checking. I'm going to wait for her to finish. I leaned back against the wall, one hand touching it as though balancing myself. Horror rolled through me and settled hot and fearsome in my gut. Lindell always has to go see for herself. You're right about her being the best. He raised an eyebrow at me. She paid a damned high price for it, though. The wall was ready to talk, but not about Carlita. I needed to concentrate to find that story, and Ruiz stayed to taunt me with more stories about Emily. How's that? I asked. What price? The ultimate price. Sold her soul is what I heard, but not to the devil. Some local demon that gives her insights no one else has. She solves the cases, but damn. Ruiz turned to watch her. Woman with no soul. Does explain a lot. I stayed focused on Ruiz. He was uncomfortably close to the truth. She sold her soul? Just like in the movies, he answered. I grinned, hoping to laugh it off. Well, I guess I know what to get her for her birthday. Ruiz laughed, a sound that came from deep inside his belly. He shook his finger at me, walked away chuckling. I put aside wondering whether Emily and I were ghouls and demons. I needed to find a different kind of monster tonight. My hands pressed against the smooth dry wall, and a group of old men faded into existence. I didn't know them, but the wall did. Bill retired from a career with a big aerospace company and used his engineering skills to keep the little trains running. Sam worked the high iron for the Class 1 railroad for 30 years before volunteering to help manage the zoo line. And there were others, men who gathered to swap lies and play trains over donuts and coffee. The wall smothered me in the memories, eager to share the joy that filled the building year after year. I flipped through the days, trying to see a young woman tied to the tracks, and the wall resisted, not wanting to revisit the pain. You know why I'm here. I'm not sure if I said it aloud. I hoped Ruiz wasn't close enough to hear me if I had. Either way, the wall heard and responded, a reluctant shuffling of 1,000 viewpoints up and down the wall, 1,000 eyes watching and remembering all that happened. Bill and Sam vanished, and the lights dimmed. A manhole cover in the floor next to the office lifted and flipped to the side, loud in the gloomy silence. Carlita's head appeared, her eyes bright and full of mischief. She climbed clear and whispered into the hole. No one's here. A male voice answered, loud in the empty building. Then why whisper? Shh, I don't know. Carlita sniffed loudly. It smells weird, like a moldy old garage. Get up here, David. The actor who'd played Frankenstein's monster climbed out to join her. David had changed into street clothes, but still wore the dark cape and fedora from the play. He was handsome in a dark, brooding way that suited his role as the monster. Carlita kissed him. He looked around the maintenance shop. I told you it'd be perfect for filming the Pauline teaser. The locomotive's a bit small, but it'll be in shadow. We'll add a different backdrop in post. Carlita grinned at him. And I'll be your Pauline, always in peril. She turned and looked into the manhole. This is so cool. A cave with passages between SLU and the zoo. We should film something down there too. My friends explored it when we were kids. The caves go under the city go on for miles. Forest Park, the university, Bush Stadium. We snuck into a lot of ball games every summer. Carlita paced off 30 feet in front of the locomotive. Tie me here. She lay down across the rails and held her arms up to him, wrists together. I'm not sure I trust you without a safe word, lover. David pulled the knot tight and went to work on her ankles. Bananas, same as last night. There, how's that? I shivered at her words, knowing what was to come. No, tie me to the track. I need to fight against the ropes before you leap from the train to save me. Carlita kissed David's cheek when he bent over her. And not too tight, David, love. You do need to untie me before I get squished. He held the cape in front of his face, only his dark eyes visible under the brim of his hat. Nothing can save you now, Carlita. Your fate is sealed. Oh, bravo, David. Remind me to applaud for you when we're done filming and I have my hands back. Get the camera ready before we're caught. David set the tripod at knee height and attached an external light. He smiled. 1 million views by Monday, guaranteed. We're going to be famous. He walked past her and climbed onto the locomotive. Carlita tugged at her rope, suddenly unsure. You're positive you know how to do it? I worked here 2 summers in high school. Well, not on the train exactly. I did cotton candy and waffle cones, but I watched the engineers. Easier than driving a car. I'll get it moving, jam the dead man's pedal, save you, and then stop the train before it goes through the wall. Simple, simple. David started the engine. Okay, he called to her. Start screaming. Carlita screamed. She thrashed against the ropes. The train lurched, then moved forward at 1 mile per hour. 20 feet away, David leaped from the cab, cape billowing behind him. He took a step toward Carlita and almost fell. The pull of the cape slammed him against the side of the locomotive. He fought against it, tried to untie it, tried to see what had snagged it. 10 feet away, Carlita panicked, and her desperation filled me. Stop the train. Stop it. Turn it off. David tried to climb back into the cab. The cape held him against the running board. 5 feet away, he shouted her name. Carlita! 2 feet away, Carlita twisted onto her side. Blood ran from where the ropes cut into her wrists. David! She watched the train close the gap, eyes wide. Bananas! The train passed over and through her, not slowing. Carlita screamed one last time. David's screams echoed off the steel walls, remembered forever in the walls that watched and talked to me of what they had seen. The force of the locomotive falling on its side ripped David free from his cape and rolled him across the concrete. He struggled to his feet, took a halting step toward the track, unsure what to do or where to go or what to do. He turned his head side to side, paralyzed by the trail of blood and gore that was all that was left of Carlita Monroe. David almost did the right thing. He held his phone in shaking hands. 911 glowed on the screen. After a moment, he canceled the unplaced call. He calmly gathered the equipment he'd set up to capture the video that was to make them famous, returned to the manhole, and dropped into the caves that lie beneath St. Louis. The wall ejected me. A feeling of disgust flowed beneath my fingers. I had known how it would end, but that didn't help. I stumbled to where Emily and Ruiz talked next to a workbench, my legs weak. The images of Carlita's slaughter still filled my head, and it was going to take a long time before I was fully me again. I took Emily's hand without speaking, not sure I could speak, and pulled her away. Ruiz followed, curious or abused by the sight of someone holding the hand of this woman without a soul. I stopped at the manhole cover and took a deep breath and lied for Ruiz's sake, hoping Emily would understand that the wall had talked to me. I was sitting here waiting for you and thought of something. I pointed at the circle of rusted metal. Has anyone checked down there? A cave runs between the zoo and the university. Ruiz snorted. What makes you think that? I don't think it. I know it. I've taken my students into some of the passages. It's probably how they got in without triggering any alarms. Ruiz lifted the cover clear of the opening and we leaned over the pit. A rustling sound came from the darkness. Rats, Ruiz said. Nothing down there but rats. Emily looked up into my eyes. And a monster, I told her. One monster. She turned to Ruiz. Call for backup, but I'm not waiting. I shook my head. Emily, I don't know this part of the cave. We could be lost for hours. And it doesn't matter. He's back at the university by now. Emily nodded. You're sure he's headed back there? Yes. Ruiz studied me through narrowed detective eyes. He? How can you be so sure? I shrugged as though I was guessing. Oh, or she, or they, or whatever. Where else would they go? You're making a lot of assumptions. Emily jumped in to save me. But good ones. Stay here, Ruiz. Wait for the uniformed officers and the coroner. She walked backwards toward the door, not wanting to waste a moment. And don't get lost down there. I'd miss you if you got eaten by the rats. I turned to Ruiz. I guess we're leaving. He leaned close and shook my hand with a bone-crushing grip. Take care of that soul you bought, demon. I'll know if you hurt her. I forced a smile. I think we're still negotiating terms. He didn't smile back. Emily stared out at the rain as I accelerated away from the curb. Ruiz likes you, she told me with her low, warm voice. I can tell. He usually hates the men I'm with. My fingers ached from where Ruiz had crushed them. Did he shoot the others? The corners of her mouth turned up. Just one, but Robert deserved it. We found David in the university media lab. He didn't look away from the screen showing Carlita's last moments when I turned on the lights. That was fast. His voice was cold. I thought I'd have more time. He reached for the keyboard and Emily pulled him away from it. David glanced at the badge on her belt, then at me, his face calm, dispassionate. You're still too late. I cut the raw video down to just before the train hit her. It's been up 15 minutes. 20,000 views already, going viral. You'll never get ahead of it. And it's what Carlita wanted. He gestured at the screen behind him. This is the enhanced version. Better color, clearer sound, background effects. Let me finish. Emily was not calm or dispassionate when she lifted him from the chair. Carlita wanted to be torn apart by a train, have her guts wrapped around the wheels. An exaggerated shiver washed through him. I tried to stop it from happening. You'll see on the video. You'll see how it happened. You'll see how I tried. He closed his eyes and tears ran down his cheeks while Emily cuffed him. God, Carlita, I made you a promise. 1 million views for you. Your swan song will make you famous. I kept my promise. Oh, bravo, David, I told him, echoing Carlita. Remind me to applaud for you at your trial. He twisted in Emily's grip, his false anguish replaced by surprise and a touch of fear. Wait, that was before I started recording. Really? Maybe you weren't the only one recording. I followed them into the hall to wait for Ruiz. Hours later, I pulled up in front of Emily's house. The sun was just rising somewhere behind the clouds. I turned off the car and closed my eyes, the only sound the soft patter of raindrops and the tick-tick of the engine as it cooled. Emily moved, a gentle rustle next to me. Her lips touched mine, and I breathed in the close smell of her. Wet wool, coconut. Yes, definitely coconut. A good night kiss? I asked, already half asleep. A good morning kiss, she answered. I like good morning kisses. Do you want to? No, I better not. I'm going to sleep for a few minutes here in front of your house, though, if that's okay. I'll stay with you. She wrapped her fingers around mine. We caught a monster last night, Johnny. I wanted to argue. Involuntary manslaughter was the initial charge, but I wasn't sure even that would stick. The video of David trying to save Carlita was everywhere, viral, unstoppable. The camera hadn't captured him in the cold moment when he decided not to call 911. Ghouls, demons, monsters, all shades of gray. I was too tired to unravel. I kissed Emily's hand. Yes, Em. He's a monster. She sighed, a happy, contented sound. I bought some better coffee last week. Should already be brewing. It's on a timer. You want a cup? I smiled to myself, knowing I should refuse and knowing Emily would keep pushing and then I'd give in. Sure, Em. Sounds good. We stepped out of the car into the wet, gray morning. That's the end.
Fabulous. Let's see. Yes.
Okay.
Seth is applauding here. Okay, so we've got our whole crew here, and let's see. Is there anything any thoughts or anything anybody would like to share before we wrap up here tonight? Seth looks anxious to say something.
I had a wonderful evening.
It's always fun.
I love the variety.
All right. Awesome. Well, yeah, I really appreciate everyone here joining me tonight. It was fun hanging out with y'all as always. And
Yeah.
boy, has it been a long day. I don't know. It's only Wednesday, and I'm like, oh my goodness, the week needs to end. But this was fun. This was a good diversion for me.
You
So
need some of that. You need some of that coffee that'll keep you up till dawn.
I do. I do.
Yeah,
Yes.
Bowen and Jeff are not here, but Stephen and Richard, I was pulled in with both of your stories. I mean, I closed my eyes and I listened closely, and it was wonderful. I could follow everything. I was pulled in from the start and held all the way through.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yours was excellent. Really enjoyed yours.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, yours is great, Seth. And let's see. And I did put your website on the discussion for this event on the Facebook page.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, and Steve, you have one as well too. Is it stevenanderson.com or is it?
No, it's more convoluted than that, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'll post it.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and post it. And Richard, you have a website as well, right?
Yeah. It's just richardfriesen.net.
Well, that one's simple. Okay.
Yeah.
So Stevens is more complicated, but he'll post it. And so, all of you can have, more followers or stalkers, hopefully, benevolent stalkers. If you get anyone creepy, just let me know.
Yeah.
I'll give them up for you. But okay. Oh, did you?
Yeah, I dumped that off there to you. Amy.
Oh my. Oh,
I know. I need to fix it.
Okay. All right. I will put that on the Facebook group thingy so that other people can find it. And I always tell myself I'll put these things in the description for the video, but it's like with me and YouTube and actually putting that stuff in, it's like I have high hopes and then sometimes I forget, but at least I can put it on the Facebook group. So anyway, I know we're probably all getting ready to pumpkin, so I'll go ahead and release everybody into the wild, but have a great night. And hopefully I'll see you next month, either as readers or as audience members, but it's always fun.
Always.
Always.
Yeah.
Thank you for hosting.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for
All
the
right.
venue.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. All right. So that is a wrap for tonight. And just FYI, the next show is February 16th at 7 p.m. The theme for that is Love Kills. And March 16th is Beats and Beats, which is a Jack Kerouac tribute. You don't have to read Jack Kerouac. No, in fact, preferably not, because I don't think it's public domain anyway. But it's just an idea for doing like kind of coffee house beat poetry inspired stuff. So flash fiction would be awesome. Poetry is good, some combination of the two. And if you choose to read for any of those shows, as always, it's a 20-minute time limit. And that can be, a combination of things, but the whole thing has to fit in 20 minutes. So yes, that's it. Have a good night. Stay safe and be seeing you soon.